Hello friends. Today we have a special story from a book called Peter Rabbit's Giant Storybook. This book has lots of different stories that Beatrix Potter wrote. Beatrix Potter wrote some of these stories over 100 years ago. So the language might be a little different. There might be some words that she uses in their stories that are different than the words that we use now. When we get to one of them, or some of them, I'll say what it actually means that we use today, okay? Today we're going to be reading a story about a frog, and his name is Mr. Jeremy Fisher. This book belonged to my son, Jeremy, and that was one of his most favorite stories because it had his name in it. Isn't that fun when you see your name in a story? He really liked that. I'm going to hold this right here because this book is really heavy. Okay, I hope you can see it, but I'll show you up close. This is The Tale of Jeremy Fisher, and it was written in 1906, 116 years ago. There's Mr. Jeremy Fisher with his pole on his boat. And here he is fishing. Can you see that? Once upon a time, there was a frog called Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He lived in a little damp house amongst the buttercups at the edge of a pond. The water was all slippy sloppy in the larder and in the back passage. Larder means a cupboard or a room for food. But Mr. Jeremy liked getting his feet wet. Nobody ever scolded him, and he never caught a cold. He was quite pleased when he looked out and saw large drops of rain splashing in the pond. "I will get some worms and go fishing and catch a dish of minnows for my dinner," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "If I catch more than 5 fish, I will invite my friends, Mr. Alderman, Ptolemy Tortoise, and Sir Isaac Newton. The alderman, however, eats salad." Mr. Jeremy put on a mackintosh and a pair of shiny galoshes. He took his rod and basket and set off with enormous hops to the place where he kept his boat. A mackintosh is another name for a raincoat, and galoshes are the name of rain boots. The boat was round and green and very much like the other lily leaves. It was tied to a water plant in the middle of the pond. Mr. Jeremy took his reed pole and pushed the boat out into the open water. "I know a good place for minnows," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. Mr. Jeremy stuck his pole into the mud and fastened his boat to it, and then he settled himself cross-legged and arranged his fishing tackle. He had the dearest little red float. His rod was a tough stalk of grass. His line was a fine, long, white horsehair, and he tied a little wiggling worm to the end. The rain trickled down his back, and for nearly an hour he stared at the float. "This is getting tiresome. I think I should like some lunch," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He punted back again amongst the water plants, and he took some lunch out of his basket. "I will eat a butterfly sandwich and wait until the shower is over," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. A great water beetle came up underneath the lily leaf and tweaked the toe of his galoshes. Mr. Jeremy crossed his legs up shorter, out of reach, and went on eating his sandwich. Once or twice, moving about with a rustle and a splash among the rushes at the side of the pond, something twitched. "I trust that is not a rat," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "I think I had better get away from here." Mr. Jeremy shoved the boat out again a little ways and dropped in the bait. There was a bite almost directly, and the float gave a tremendous bobbit. "A minnow! A minnow! I have him by the nose!" cried Mr. Jeremy Fisher, jerking up his rod. Here he is eating. He's waiting for his minnow. There's the rat, possibly. And he thinks he's got a minnow. But what a horror surprise! Instead of a smooth, fat minnow, Mr. Jeremy landed little Jack Sharp, the stickleback, covered with spines. This fish is not a good fish to catch because it will poke you. The stickleback floundered about in the boat, pricking and snapping until he was quite out of breath, and then he jumped back into the water. And a shoal of other little fishes put their heads out and laughed at Mr. Jeremy Fisher. A shoal means like a whole plank of fish just came out and started laughing at him. He probably didn't feel very good when they did that. And while Mr. Jeremy sat disconsolately on the edge of his boat, sucking his sore fingers and peering down into the water, a much worse thing happened. A really frightful thing it would have been if Mr. Jeremy had not been wearing a mackintosh. A great, enormous trout came up with a ker-plop and splashed as it seized Mr. Jeremy with a snap. "Ow, ow, ow!" And then he turned and dived down to the bottom of the pond. Here's the stickleback poking him, and here's the shoal of little fish laughing at him. And there's the trout that grabbed him. You can see his little feet sticking out. Oh dear, Mr. Jeremy's not having a good fishing day, is he? But the trout was so displeased with the taste of the mackintosh that in less than half a minute he spat him out again, and the only thing that it swallowed was Mr. Jeremy's galoshes. Mr. Jeremy bounced up to the surface of the water like a cork and the bubbles out of a soda bottle, and he swam with all of his might to the edge of the pond. He scrambled out of the first bank he came to and hopped home across the meadow with his mackintosh all in tatters. "What a mercy that was! Not a pike," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "I have lost my rod and my basket, but it does not much matter, for I am sure I should never dare to go fishing again." He's not going to go again, he says. He put some sticking plaster on his fingers, and his friends both came to dinner. He could not offer them any fish, but he had something else in his larder. Oops, I forgot to show you. Here he is escaping from the trout, and he had to go home with his raincoat, his mackintosh, all in tatters. And there's that trout. He let go of that Jeremy Fisher. And here comes his friends, Ptolemy Tortoise and Sir Isaac Newton. And Jeremy says he's never going to go fishing again. Sir Isaac Newton wore his black and gold waistcoat, and Mr. Alderman and Ptolemy Tortoise brought a salad with them in a string bag. and instead of a nice dish of minnows, they had roasted grasshopper with ladybird sauce, which frogs consider a beautiful treat. But I think it must have been nasty. Here's his friends coming to eat dinner with him, but no minnows. Grasshopper instead. Do you see the grasshopper on the plate? How do you think that would taste? Ew. I hope you enjoyed this story of Mr. Jeremy Fisher by Beatrix Potter. Tomorrow we'll have another story by Beatrix Potter. I'll see you later. Bye.